This message is based on John chapter 10 verses 1 to 10, and I'm calling it The Good Shepherd, Jesus the Good Shepherd. So today's reading, it's all about sheep and shepherds. But before we look at what it's saying, there's a couple of things we need to note. One is that the metaphor of shepherds and sheep has been used for a long time for the people of Israel and their leaders. Ezekiel chapter 34 begins like this. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who take only care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. And then later in the chapter, God says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. And then in verse 16, I will shepherd the flock with justice. So there's already a picture established of Israel as the flock, the leaders as shepherds, though not very good shepherds. And then there's the promise that God himself would be the true shepherd who would come to care for his sheep. Second thing is to note that caring about sheep in those days is very different from today. They couldn't just put them out in nice pasture to graze because any decent land in that area had to be used for crop growing. And so the sheep would be out in the desert areas. The flocks were small and the shepherd would stay with the flock all day, just leading them from one bit to the next. And so a bond would build up between the sheep and the shepherd. The shepherd would keep calling the sheep so that the sheep recognised his voice and they knew where to follow. And you can still see this today in the Middle East. You'll see little flocks of sheep or goats, and they look like they must be feeding on rocks, but they're actually a little tuft of grass there. And the shepherds, who are often children, say 12, 10, would be just leading them slowly across the landscape, and you just hear them call every now and again. They don't necessarily say anything, they might be just saying woo 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 or something like that just to get the voice. So the sheep would know the voice of their shepherd. Now this chapter in John, chapter 10, follows on chapter 9, which is the story of the man who was born blind and healed by Jesus. This man comes to recognise that Jesus is the Messiah, but the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders, reject Jesus and say he must be a sinful man because he's done this on the Sabbath day. And it's just showing that they are the ones who are spiritually blind. So John begins chapter 10 talking about false shepherds. They are simply thieves and robbers. They sneak into the sheep pen in a devious way because they have no concern for the sheep, only what they can get from them. The real shepherd is the one who comes in via the gate, and the overnight watchman would let him in because there are often a number of flocks penned together overnight. And the shepherd, all he had to do was come and call, and his sheep knew his voice, and so they would follow and the others would stay there. Jesus then says, I am the true shepherd. But he says, I'm also the gate from which the sheep can go in and out. Now the statement that he is the gate is saying he is the only way that is through him that we will find true life and a full life. Anything else will only lead to death and destruction. Life with Jesus is a life that starts now. It enables us to be set free from guilt. It enables us to be healed from past hurts. It gives us the assurance that we are loved with a love beyond our imagination. We can trust what will happen in the future because we know that we're in God's hands and he only wants the best for us. But it's also a life that goes into eternity. We have the promise that if we follow Jesus now, we will spend the rest, after this life, we will spend life with him. But that life is found only through Jesus. Now the picture of Jesus as the Good Shepherd is the one who actually cares for each individual sheep. He provides for their needs. But it does mention the sheep following the shepherd's voice. So we need to listen to the voice of our Good Shepherd. How do we hear his voice? Well, it's not difficult. We're actually created to hear the voice of God. God is a God who communicates, and he's always communicating with us. And we don't have to wait for some thunderous voice coming out of the sky. We don't have to wait for flashing lights across the heavens. God's always talking to us. And it may be just that feeling, oh, I should ring Uncle Fred. Or it may be a sense, what I'm doing here is not right. Sometimes a word will just come to our mind about a situation. It seems to come out of the blue. Other times we might be reading the Bible and a verse suddenly jumps out at us and we say, oh, yes. Or we might get a few different people, in a few days or a few weeks, they tell us the same thing. And we say, I think God is trying to say something to me. God's always speaking. We need to learn how to listen. How do we know it's God? Not just our own thoughts. Well, that is not easy. But the more we know the nature of God, the easier it's going to come. We will make mistakes, but we can always learn from our mistakes. It's important that we get to know Jesus, and we get to know him through reading about him in the scripture, but also talking with him in prayer. And the better we know him, then the easier it is to recognise when it's him speaking to us. Jesus refers to himself after the end of the reading that he is the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep. That just shows us the extent of love that God has for each of us. Jesus was willing to give his own life for you and I. He is the true shepherd, and following him will bring true life.